Let's take you through the papers this morning. Let's start with the Mail on Sunday. Keir Starmer does support the rail strikers, says the Mail on Sunday. The Labour leader says he doesn't want a walkout, but a leaked document says he backs union barons, as they put it.
The Sunday Telegraph reports on comments by the Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng that unions are bribing workers, his word, to strike. He said unions had been amassing a war chest for some time to fund summer chaos. Sunday Times has the PM saying, steel yourselves for a longer war. Allies have been urged to hold their nerve on aid for Ukraine. So let's go through the papers now. And joining us this morning, journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani in amazing pink, and writer and commentator Benedict Spence, who's not, but that's all right.
No,
yeah, hey, sorry, you don't want to be critical of your sartorial elegance. Benedict, the rail strikes.
Yes. I mean, it's the front page of the Mail, isn't it? It says that Starmer supports the rail strikers. And I've got to be honest, I don't think that that's particularly, shocking to most people. It's the Labour leader. He ought to be at least on the side of working people.
But he said the exact opposite on
No,
camera.
he says that he wants to avoid a strike. That's not necessarily saying that he doesn't agree.
want them to happen.
He doesn't want them to happen. That doesn't mean that he doesn't agree that they might have legitimate gripes. I think that that's the key thing. He recognises that this is going to affect millions of working people around the country. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all rail strikers shouldn't necessarily walk out in a bid to get themselves slightly better working conditions. The difficulty, of course, is when it comes to railway workers, we're always given the figure, aren't we? Oh, train drivers, they get 70, 80 grand a year. But we're not really talking about those people. We're talking about everybody else, who I think the average wage for somebody who works on the railways in the UK is about 30, just under 30k, which actually, when you think about it, in the midst of a cost of living crisis and the fact that they haven't had a pay rise in about 4 years, is not all that much. And I do think there are legitimate gripes. Now, I'm supposed to be going on holiday on Tuesday, when the strikes are first happening. And I'm sat here going, well, my holiday isn't going to get off to a great start, what with everything else we've seen. But if I can sit here and say, actually, I do think there's not necessarily anything wrong with people trying to get a decent living wage for themselves, well, maybe it isn't particularly unfair then for the Labour leader to come out and say, well, yeah, I'm kind of on board with these strikes as well. I don't want them to happen, but these people do need to be paid a decent amount.
But the way the Mail on Sunday is playing it is so they're almost saying, if you are really seriously, I'm trying to think of the right word, messed up by the rail strikes and everything. Don't blame the government, blame Keir Starmer because he's supporting it.
I mean, ultimately, in this country, we haven't quite got to grips with that because, of course, we went through Thatcherism, we went through the whole business of privatising lots of things. Railways are natural monopolies. They're one of the few things that actually I don't think governments should be privatising because you can't have fair competition. And a lot of the gripes that the rail workers have about the amount of money that's being taken out of the system through dividends, these are completely legitimate gripes they have with their employers. And I think it's high time, actually, that governments in this country stopped passing the buck onto private companies, private employers, and actually brought the railways back into national ownership. It's one of the very few things that I'm on board with nationalising, but I don't see how this is a fair system. And as we're seeing, a lot of people aren't being paid a decent amount of money. Forget the train drivers. We're talking about cleaners. We're talking about people in ticket offies. Actually, a lot of people.
Nationalisation worked so well last time.
Yeah, but that was a long time ago.
It was, but everything, the carriages were awful.
They're awful now. The service is awful now. And this is the thing, if it's going to be awful, let's at least keep as much of the money as we can in the system rather than having the real thing that...
It's a lot better than it used to be.
Well, everything are a lot better than it used to be, and that's the nature of progress. But I think it's very telling that a lot of rail companies on the continent, for example, own shares in our railway companies, and they use the money that they take out of our railways to subsidise their own train services. I think that tells you a lot about how dysfunctional our system is.
Well, I personally think that the Mail on Sunday's front page is quite a legitimate one, in fact, because if you think about it, it's actually bizarre that Keir Starmer is not coming out more unequivocally in support of the trade unions. At the end of the day, the Labour Party was literally set up to protect workers' rights against the bosses, and many would argue that it might have lost its way when Tony Blair was in charge, who, as we've seen, was more of a capitalist than a socialist. But it's now up to Keir Starmer to actually stamp his identity on his own party and come up with great new policies and get himself elected to put them.
Do you think that's the problem with him? He doesn't want to be Jeremy Corbyn and he doesn't want to be Tony Blair. We know what he doesn't want to be seen as, but he's having trouble actually saying what he is.
Well, I think what could turn out to be one of the biggest strikes in a generation is a perfect time, actually, for a Labour Party and for the Labour leader to be asserting his party's identity and indeed his own identity. And I think that the fact that he's failing to do that shows that he's a weak leader And it shows, it triggers great concern for Labour Party supporters. I think,
Is he just aware, though, of the fact that actually there's an awful lot of people in the country who do not support these strikes, and he's thinking of winning votes?
Well, I think what these strikes are all about, ultimately, is about fixing the economy. There's a very big gap between the rich and the poor, and, workers, low-level ones in particular, are the most affected by that. So the Labour Party, and all parties actually, should be doing whatever they can to come up with great new policies, and especially as far as the Labour Party is concerned, get themselves elected to try and do something about it.
What's the Sunday Telegraph saying about all this, Nabila?
It's an interesting story because it's effectively the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, who is accusing the biggest trade unions of effectively bribing workers to go on strike after they doubled daily payments to those taking part in industrial action. And I have to say the story is written in very hyperbolic language, with the business secretary saying that the unions had been plotting a dangerous summer of chaos, or that indeed union chiefs had been quietly amassing a war chest to effectively bribe workers to unleash.
Don't they?
Absolutely,
the
I
biggest
think
unions try to provide strike pay, don't they?
It's actually a common thing to do for unions to give basically the workers an incentive to assert what they believe is their right to ask for better payment. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I think we can always argue whether going on strike is the right way to go about it. I think we all more or less have sympathy for workers and, the fact that they have to go on strike to achieve a better pay. Clearly, the traditional way of negotiating beer and sandwiches has failed, and that's why we're in this situation.
Well, this is what I don't understand now. It's down to who you believe. But Network Rail's chief negotiator says the RMT has finished the talks before we've actually finished. Our offers have been rejected. The union demands are far from affordable. Network Rail's serious about trying to find a solution and work out a compromise that gives people a decent pay rise. Well, if the RMT's saying that, if you believe them, then it's... if Network Rail's saying that, then the RMT's just walked out and is determined to strike.
Yes, well, absolutely. I think the government has already pledged a 21 billion package to try and deal with their grievances, and it finds itself in a bit of a catch-22 situation, because if it gives in to workers, that means they're winning and they can do it again. But if they don't give in, then the anger and the frustration intensifies. And I would contend that we're not just looking at a week of chaos, but potentially a summer of discontent, especially if other aggrieved workers, such as NHS workers or indeed teachers, join in later on in the demonstrations.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
I just find it amazing that in this modern world we can't have experienced negotiators actually not letting this happen.
I mean, did you sit through Brexit like the rest of us?
Well, yeah, that's
going, good Lord, where are the experienced negotiators?
Yeah, where are they? I thought they were meant to be skilled at their jobs.
Meanwhile, there are some Tory MPs, according to the Mail on Sunday, Benedict, whose focus is purely on trying to get rid of the Prime Minister.
Yes, it's funny this, isn't it, how lots of people are very politically motivated when it comes to politics. This is the story that, having tried and failed to oust Boris Johnson, a lot of backbenchers want to change the 1922 committee's rules about how often you can bring a vote of confidence against the Prime Minister. It's currently a year. They want to reduce it to 6 months, and they plan on doing this by flooding the committee itself with their own supporters, and they think that that means that maybe then by Christmas, if things haven't picked up, they're going to be able to have another vote about Boris Johnson. And, I mean, Boris Johnson's supporters are dismissing this as a sort of a Remainer-style plot. They're framing it in those terms of, just like Remainers wanted to not respect the result of the referendum vote, similar sort of Remain-minded anti-Boris MPs want to do the same here. The problem with that, of course, that line of questioning is that, there are a lot of very vocal, staunch Brexiteer MPs, people like Steve Baker, of course, who are just as unhappy with the Prime Minister. Lord Frost is all over the newspapers these days talking about how unhappy he is with the Prime Minister. So I think that's a little hard to frame it as simply a Remainer plot. But I would say, actually, that this is not the time to do this. I don't think that a lot of the backbenchers realise. They might have realised at the start, Boris Johnson is bedded in like a tick. He's not Margaret Thatcher, he's not John Major, and he doesn't care what did for those Prime Ministers. Ultimately, unless you get the critical number of votes with Boris Johnson, he's not going anywhere. If you want to keep on drawing this out and having lots and lots of leadership fights in the sort of the 24 months or so in the build-up to the next general election, well, that's fine. But that's just going to lead to lots of infighting. It's going to lead to more, sort of blocks on government, more sort of chaos. Really, their best bet, having fumbled the effort to try to get rid of him, having put it off for so long, and then had a go and then failed, really, is probably to get round Boris Johnson, to get round the Prime Minister and try to make this work. Because right now, as we often talk about when it comes to the leadership, there are no real sort of standout candidates to replace them. So that even if he were ousted, whoever comes in has then got to try to create a bit of a sort of a profile that is enough to sort of stop there from being a hung parliament or, goodness knows, a defeat at the next general election. They've just not played it very well. And so I really do think that this idea of trying to change the rules to get rid of Boris Johnson this late in the game, I think that's a real high-risk strategy, frankly, for the Tory party.
Gosh, meanwhile, though, as we look towards a summer of discontent, as you were saying, or maybe even longer, the Ukraine war looks as though it's going to go on and on and on. I mean, that's something that we were told yesterday, wasn't it? We were talking to the President Zelensky's advisor, who said that they know that it's going to take a long time. And Boris Johnson has been warning all of the other countries, this is going to be a very long run.
Yeah, you've got 60 seconds, Nabila.
Yes, well, it's a very powerful letter and it's very much spot on. We have to brace ourselves for the long term and offering committed long-term support to the Ukraine, because this war is not going to go anywhere. If you put it in perspective, the Ukraine is the size of Texas in the US, whereas Russia is almost twice the size of America, and its and its resources are massive. And I can't see Putin capitulating, especially as Boris Johnson puts it quite rightly. He sees Ukraine as part of Imperial Russia.
Yeah.
Well, and Putin was actually made a speech yesterday, didn't he, threatening other countries that were in the former Soviet Union, that if you don't stand by us now, you'll be the next.
The age of the unipolar world is over, is what he said, and I think he's right.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, isn't it? Look, Nabila, Benedict, thank you both very much indeed. We shall see you a little bit later on. 7:39. Time for the papers this morning. We'll start with the Mail on Sunday. Sir Keir Starmer does support the rail strikes, it claims. The Labour leader says he doesn't want to walk out, but a leaked document says he backs the union barons.
The Sunday Telegraph reports on comments by the Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng that unions are bribing workers to strike. He said unions had been amassing a war chest for some time to fund a summer of chaos.
Sunday Times has the Prime Minister saying, steel yourselves for a longer war. Allies have been urged to hold their nerve when it comes to aid for Ukraine.
And the Sunday Express reports on the Attorney-General's comments that it's time to take control of our borders. She said the British people, rather than European judges, should decide on who can and cannot stay in our country.
Interesting. It's got that European Court of Human Rights ruling. Though the person who made that decision to sort of hold the flight may well have been a British judge.
Yes.
They're part of the system.
Well, they're part of the European Court of Human Rights, which we set up after the war.
We did.
Nothing to do with the EU.
No, nothing to do with the EU. It gets very complicated.
Oh, it does, doesn't it?
Let's go through the papers in a bit more detail then with the journalist Nabila Ramdani and the writer and commentator Benedict Spence. Morning to
again.
you both. We'll kick off with a bit of football, should we? Or sort of football, Nabila, in the Star.
Yes, was it a play on word, kick off with football?
Oh, yeah, not a deliberate one.
I know you're not terribly a football fan, are you?
No.
But this is far removed from football, actually. It's a story about the forthcoming World Cup, which warns that World Cup footy fans hoping for a bit of extra time in the bedroom are being warned that they might end up behind bars if they have sex outside marriage. And because the World Cup is taking place in Qatar, which is a Gulf state with very conservative rules, the country is already saying that it will not relax its rules for British supporters. So here's
if you're planning on going out there with your partner to whom you're not married, you're in a bit of trouble. I mean, can you even stay in the same hotel room?
Well, potentially, that could be a problem as well. I mean, a night of passion could mean 7 years in prison.
Do you think that's reasonable enough? I mean, it's their country, their rules. If you want to visit them to watch the football, you should abide by their rules.
Well, I think that what this story is about is effectively a country that it's not prepared to change its culture because it's holding, a very one of the greatest sporting events, which is the World Cup. And we can argue, of course, how society are organised all day, and whether we're talking about Britain or America or indeed Qatar. But the bottom line is that the World Cup is being held in Qatar because it's a massively rich country and it's pouring multi-billion into the game, and that's why it can effectively do what it's like. I mean, on paper, it's a very impactful story, but effectively it's only stating the obvious, I'm afraid.
Yes.
And, of course, choosing an event like the World Cup is always a great opportunity to, put forward criticism because it's the apt moment to do so. But again, I mean, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more criticism about Qatar in the months leading up to the World Cup. But, we can argue about human rights, and I think it's right and proper to do so. But in the end, it's all about money, isn't it? I think football in particular involves a large amount of money and indeed a morality. And I've seen the figures in relation to Qatar. I mean, it multiplies. It's immense wealth every second. It's very rich in.
You can
liquefied
predict
gas.
there will be problems, can't you?
Oh, there's
With
yeah.
hordes of footy fans going out there to watch the football and think they can behave the way they want to behave.
Oh, yes.
And you'll find that the Qataris don't like it.
They don't, yeah, they're not particularly famous for their tolerance of people misbehaving in public. And, so I do think it's going to be a curious World Cup. I mean, they managed to hold one in Russia without there being massive amount of problems. But I think the very fact that they held one in Russia, before then having one in Qatar, I think kind of shows you what the real issue is. As Nabila says, it's all about money. And football sold its soul a long time ago.
Yeah,
And
but they really did this time.
I find it kind of amusing, actually, that we're getting all sort of het up about Qatar, given that, 20 years ago we did sell one of our biggest football clubs to somebody who was nicknamed Putin's purse, because, he's so deeply tied to the Russian state. And, Paris Saint-Germain are owned by the Qataris as well. It's an odd one for us in the UK, in the Premier League, which is all about, money at almost any cost, to start getting upset about this and the other. We can get upset about these things, but look, football was for sale a long time ago, and you have to sort of, you reap what you sow.
Tell us about asylum seekers in the Telegraph. What's the take on this?
Yes, so this is the news that in the sort of the last 15 months, the numbers of asylum seekers coming to the UK has jumped 60,000 in a year, with over 110,000 people currently awaiting, juxtaposed with the fact that only 15 applicants have actually been deported, sent back, failed their asylum applications and been sent back to safe countries. None of them have gone to France, incidentally. None of them have been people that sort of crossed in boats and then been sent back to France. And I think that that's just an interesting way of sort of... We've had the Rwanda discussion in this country for a couple of weeks now, and I do think that we often sort of lose sight of the scale of the issue. This is a massive increase, and it's not just in the UK. I mean, the EU border force has pointed out there's been an 82% increase in people coming into the UK, into the EU in the last year. And it must be said, a lot of those people are coming from Iran, Iraq, but specifically Afghanistan. This is getting lost a lot. People are talking about economic migrants and this and the other. There are a lot of those people, but an awful lot of them are coming from Afghanistan. And this, I think, is the flip side of Western countries sort of getting involved in other parts of the world and then going, well, it's too expensive, it's too difficult, we're going to have to pull back. There are consequences for that. And I think whilst it's all very well and fair to say that, criminals need to be deported and there need to be sort of proper checks and balances on people coming in for economic migration, I think we've kind of slightly passed the buck on this side, specifically on Afghanistan. I'm more than happy to say that a lot of other people shouldn't come to the country. But Afghanistan was actually more or less a functioning situation. It wasn't a great country, but we had propped it up and then we withdrew.
They would be considered, sort of suitable asylum applicants, wouldn't they?
Well, this is the thing, is it's often framed as there are tens of thousands of economic migrants, and there are, and the government is actually, as much as it likes to talk a tough game, it is actually quite keen for economic migrants to come into this country. We do have an ageing population, we need young working-age people, but an awful lot of these people are coming as a result of a conflict that we essentially triggered by going in and then re-triggered when we withdrew unilaterally without setting up a viable alternative. But this is why, we do need to have a serious conversation about it.
regards so high.
Yeah.
You wonder how on earth they can figure out what to do.
Dare I say, I mean, a lot of people use the argument that all these migrants are coming for economic reasons, as if it was some kind of crime.
As though that was wrong, yes.
You know, if you're...
Why shouldn't they want to improve their lives?
Been devastated by war and indeed economic collapse, then of course you would want your life, to be safe and you want protected.
But it's how you come here. That's the argument,
But I
isn't
think
it?
the West has a duty of care, especially when we're talking about countries like Britain, for example, which is a world power that has been intervening in numerous global countries, including in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria to a certain extent, providing weapons, and now to a certain extent in the Ukraine. It is providing a safe passage for migrants coming from the Ukraine. Why can't they do the same for people from other blighted countries, such as the Middle East and Central Asia?
This is important because this is an 82% increase in migration into the EU, not taking Ukraine into account. That's over the last 12 months, not taking into account the fact that there are millions of people now in Eastern Europe, and it is predominantly Eastern Europe. They're not going to be coming to the UK because they want to stay in proximity. They want to go back. They want to be in a country that's close, culturally a lot closer to what they're used to. But still, that's 82% before we take into account the fact that Russia has completely upended Eastern Europe.
I guess the argument with Ukraine is, though, that these are people who are desperately wanting to get home as soon as possible, which is a different situation. Can we have a look at Nabila at the Mail on Sunday? And I feel very sorry about this. President Biden falling off his bike, because it's an open goal for those who want to criticise him. Is a 79-year-old on a bike and he fell off? We all fall off bikes every now and then. So I've got a little bit of sympathy for him.
Do we, though? I think the Mail's got it right, calling him Sleepy Joe. And, you know, the puns are just flying all over the articles. The wheels have come off. Joe Biden's popularity has been plunging fast. And the US president took a literal tumble yesterday when he fell off his bike. He argued that he lost control after struggling to remove his shoes from the pedal toe cages. Well, if you actually look at the footage and the video of the actual fall, it looks like one of his foot is actually firmly grounded on the floor. So it's more a matter of an old man losing his balance and just falling off, I'm afraid. I mean, this was horribly embarrassing.
But he's 79. He's going to...
Well, I think an interesting fact in America is that you can get full retirement benefits age 67. So it makes me wonder, and I've never understood...
You want to usher him into retirement.
...why, you know, a massive country like America, they're relying on OAPs to deliver the actual
don't they? They're the only
presidents.
people who can drum up enough money to campaign.
This is a wonderful case, though, of life imitating art. I don't know if anybody remembers The West Wing.
The
very first episode, of course.
Yeah.
It's all about a president who has underlying health conditions falling off his bicycle.
Yes, it is.
That's the whole episode.
The very first episode of The West Wing. Yeah.
All those years ago.
Interesting. I mean, Biden is
Otis
turning
has fallen off his
80
bike.
this year. He's turning 80 this year, and, you know, it's not the first time he's fallen off. You know, he's tripped, on steps before.
But there are
including more
cameras on
recently.
him 24/7.
No, but it's not just that. I mean, there are lots of examples where he looked disorientated and his speech is slurred. He doesn't quite know what he's saying. And you'll ask any GP, and he'll tell you that these are clear signs of somebody who's not in full health. So he should certainly take some time off and literally slow down.
Take the summer off.
Well, he won't be running for a second term, will he?
No.
Well, who knows? Who knows
Well,
with
no,
that
but
country?
that's pretty
Well, he said he wouldn't,
No.
but maybe he'll feel the need to. Who knows? But
I mean, maybe he feels he's got a chance against Donald Trump. I suppose it depends who else decides to stand.
If Donald Trump stands, I don't know. I don't know
think
that
he
he
will.
will.
Do you know what I really fear? We were talking about this in the room backstage. I think it'll be Clinton-Trump too. I really do fear that that's what's going to happen, because Hillary Clinton is in the FT this weekend. They've done an interview.
She's going to run.
She hasn't said, but she's in the FT doing an interview. She's in the New Statesman doing an interview. She's doing the rounds. And again, I just think, do you know what? She's probably thinking, if Trump's going to run again, why not me?
Well, dare I say,
Maybe.
Trump is himself is chomping, at the bit for another run at the presidency.
Of course he is.
He's age 76, but I have to say he looks far more sprightly than Joe Biden. But it's a
That's just
farcical
the tan.
situation, that we have OAPs running.
it is farcical, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you look at like a young
young
president like Zelensky, who seems to be doing so well at doing what's needed, at stepping up and looking as though he is strong and fit for the job.
He's something like Pete Buttigieg for the...
Buttigieg versus DeSantis would be
DeSantis.
much more enlivening. But again,
They've got to come up with
a
something.
lot of the reasons that people suggesting that China and Russia are moving as they are is because of a belief that the American political system is broken, because you never know who it's going to be. It's
They're a load of old men as well.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah, such is life.
Yeah. Nabila, Benedict, we're going to leave it there, but it's good to see you, and we shall catch up a little bit later on.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at the papers for you this morning. We'll start with the Mail on Sunday. Keir Starmer does support the strikers. It says the paper. The Labour leader says he doesn't want to walk out, but a leaked document says he backs the union barons.
The Sunday Telegraph reports on comments by the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, that unions are bribing workers to strike. He said unions had been amassing a war chest for some time to fund a summer of chaos. Sunday Times leads with the PM saying, steel yourselves for a longer war. Allies have been urged to hold their nerve when it comes to aid for Ukraine. And I'm finally free to be me. Dame Kelly Holmes comes out in a Sunday Mirror exclusive declaring I am gay. The Olympic legend reveals she's hidden her sexuality for 34 years. Well, let's go through some of those in a bit more detail with the journalist Nabila Ramdani and the writer and commentator Benedict Spence. Morning to you both.
Morning.
Morning.
In the Sunday Express, Nabila, there's a really sort of fascinating interview with Camilla.
Yes, and I like this story very much. I mean, it's essentially Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. She has given an interview to the British magazine Vogue, no less, where she'll also be photographed in next month's edition to mark her 75th birthday on July the 17th. And she opens up about all sorts of issues, including her 17-year-old marriage to Prince Charles, about family life, receiving text messages from her grandchildren, for example, getting older, but also dealing with criticism. And
she must have really felt it over the years.
Yes. Also her difficulty on getting to use social media, for example, which is quite amusing. So wonderful insights into her life as a royal and her plans as a future queen. And I picked up on some of the things she's quoted saying. The criticism bit is crucial because she explains how in the 1980s she and her family faced a level of scrutiny when Prince Charles' marriage to Diana broke down. And she's just very pragmatic about it. And she says nobody likes to be looked at all the time and criticised. But I think in the end, I sort of rise above it and just get on with it. You've got to get on with life, she adds. So I think it's a very British attitude, dare I say.
Well, it's probably the only one when you are faced with a barrage of criticism on all levels. I mean, some of it was just darned unkind about her looks.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, she was, at one time, she must have felt, certainly, that she was the most hated woman in Britain.
Well, yeah, indeed, but she's very much a happily married woman now. And, she in this interview, it clearly is enjoying life. And she explains how she finds time for her marriage between performing royal duty. She uses a very interesting nautical expression. She basically says sometimes it's like a ship passing in the nights. When she bumps into Prince Charles, basically. But we always sit down together and have a cup of tea and discuss the day. And to me, that's quintessentially English, to have that attitude in life. But, she talks about her love of the countryside. She's going to feature in an ITV documentary and edit Country Life magazine. And I have to say, I'm a great fan of Camilla Parker Bowles. I've met her last week at Ascot, and she was there with Prince Charles, and she comes across as very down-to-earth, very realistic. And, I think, unlike many people in the public eye, I think the real key to admiring Camilla is that she really seems to enjoy life, and she takes a day as it comes. And I think she's seriously prepared to take all the criticism with a pinch of salt.
I wonder if the country has forgiven her as a whole.
Why should they forgive her? I mean, that's always been my attitude. It's been like, well, a marriage breaks down for various reasons, and Diana, as much as we sort of venerate her in a way, was not perfect, was she? These things happen. And I always thought it was very cruel that Camilla became so disliked, as though she'd deliberately gone in and broken something up. When, in a sense, she was sort of jilted, wasn't she?
She was.
Because she thought she wasn't suitable to be a royal or whatever. And
Charles was sent off round the world and expected to get over her, wasn't he?
Well, the Queen certainly seems to be a big fan of Camilla, and she sees her as far more than Princess Charles's wife.
But we've moved on. They've moved on. I just wonder if we have. I know I've said this before on the programme, and there are a lot of people watching at the moment who will not forgive her and do not want her to be queen.
How long is their wedding? Have they been married?
17 years.
where is my life going? I still think it was about 5 years.
I know, it
was
really
so-
feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's that much animosity held towards her anymore. I think that, appreciation for Princess Diana doesn't necessarily go hand in hand these days. I mean, perhaps amongst people that I don't know, but most people that I know don't really hold any ill will towards Camilla. I think they just like her that she is, as Nabila says, she just gets on with the job. She doesn't pull too much focus. She does what you would hope of a royal, which is fulfilling their duties with minimal fuss. I think that's actually what we want from them,
important thing
frankly.
I see is that she makes him happy.
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
dare I say, I mean, foreigners are very impressed by what is a typical British type. And Camilla is very much a typical
really
British type. She's very English. She loves the countryside. Her sense of humour is very British as well.
Nice. She's a lovely.
and she
She's a
doesn't
very nice
moan.
person.
She gets on with things. So I really like her Englishness.
Benedict, let's talk about St Ives turning into Maplins.
Yes, this is something that I suppose it's probably we're going to hear more and more of, isn't it, as the climate warms up and everybody stays at home a lot more instead of going to the Med. I did hear about going to Kos and Corfu just before we came on, and I am very jealous of
Me
those
too,
people.
I know.
I'll get there sooner or later, provided that all the flights don't get cancelled. But this is talking about second homes in St Ives, and it's not just in St Ives, it also talks about places like Whitby in Yorkshire. And in St Ives a few years ago, in 2016, they tried to pass a new policy which was going to safeguard housing for local people to make sure that new building developments would set aside certain amounts of houses for local people that were going to be affordable. And it hasn't really stopped what is the major issue here, which is a very beautiful town and a very beautiful part of the country being hollowed out by people buying houses for second homes, for holiday homes, being occupied for 1 or 2 weeks of the year. This is, I suppose, another facet of the housing crisis.
But why hasn't the policy worked then?
Well,
It was
the
a
problem is
deliberate
it
policy.
only applies to
new build.
builds, which aren't necessarily the most desirable ones in the centre of town, sort of on the beachfront or anything like that. That's the older stuff, and that can still be snapped up by people from London and the south of England who want a second home. And that is exactly what's happening, and the people are saying that the town has sort of been hollowed out, except for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer when everybody sort of flocks down from London. I mean, there are lessons to be learnt here, actually, from the Mediterranean. I mean, one of the things that's sort of quite well known in Italy, for example, is what's happened to places like Venice, where lots of apartments have been bought up for sort of holiday letting out purposes. And other places like Positano and Capri and the Amalfi Coast, they actually have very strict rules about what properties can be bought by who, how many tourists can go each year. They're sort of quite aggressive about this sort of thing because they recognise
They've got to be, because it can kill a town. can't it?
Italy especially has had entire communities just uprooted because of a lack of economic opportunity. So the last thing they want is, of course, the tourism industry to then hollow out the towns that are existing. But if this is what's going to happen in the UK, we're going to get warmer every year. Seaside towns are going to get more expensive. There do need to be very strict policies. I mean, I'm from East Anglia. Southwold, of course, is a very beautiful holiday town. There's lots of beach huts on the seafront there, and one of them went for £250,000 this year.
My God.
And you
that's
just
a lot of
think,
money.
sorry, last year. And that's just the direction these things are going. They're very desirable. They're very, very beautiful. Local people are being priced out.
Yes, and that's not fair. That's awful.
Well, look, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid, for now. Nabila, Benedict, it's been very good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.